All right, hello there everybody. This is episode 5 of Going Viral with Wright and Regis, just again covering the Social 20-1 curriculum during our kind of pandemic area. So today we're going to be talking about World War II, which lasts from 1939 to 1945. Now what you may notice as we go through this video is that my slides up here are going to look a lot different than the ones that you have on Google Classroom. Now that's because I've cut about 20 slides out of my presentation in order to just cover the stuff that's mandatory by the curriculum. On your slides will be posted online, you will have extra information about some of the battles, some of the weaponry and all of that, which is more just kind of general interest and not necessarily things that you'll be tested on later on. So I'm going to cover the basics, you'll have access to more. You'll also have access to videos and hyperlinks throughout the presentation. We're not going to watch that on my video here right now, so you'll be responsible for watching those on your own time. So World War II. World War II is the most destructive conflict in the history of the world. Now that's both in terms of loss of life and in damages and the cost of rebuilding the world after the battle. So this battle takes place, or this war takes place on all continents except for Antarctica. Now the ones in North and South America were very minor, but they still occurred. World War II lasts 6 years and 1 day, making it longer than World War I. And in terms of death, we're looking at 72 million people during these 6 years. Now, if you remember back to World War I, the loss of life there was about 20 million. Okay, so we're looking at over 3 times as many deaths on both sides. So of these 72 million, we're looking at 24 million soldiers or military personnel. Now, if you notice, that's a very small amount in terms of the overall loss of death. That's because the most significant loss of death occurred in the civilian area, with 49 million deaths approximately. Now, those numbers are really high because they include genocides like the Holocaust and Holodomor, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on in our genocides lecture, a few videos after this one. Now, most of these deaths occurred in the United Soviet Socialist Republic, or the USSR, and in China. So for World War II, we have 4 main causes. Now, unlike World War I, there's no catchy acronym like MAIN to help remember them. So for this one, you're going to just have to remember what they are. So the first is the Great Depression. The second is the Treaty of Versailles, which, if you remember back to our last video, is what ended World War I. Number 3 is the failure of the League of Nations. Again, that international organization that Mr. Regis covered in the interwar period video from a few videos ago. And then the rise of a new government style called fascism. Now, the Great Depression occurred in 1929 after the American stock market crashed. Now, if you look at the world right now, we are looking like we're having another recession that could turn into another depression because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is a possibility that we are heading for something similar in today's times. Now, this crash in stock prices crippled the economy, and it started a period of massive economic decline, which we now call the Great Depression. Now, because of this massive economic decline, unemployment skyrocketed across North America and in Europe. As companies have less money, they can't hire as many people, they can't pay wages, people get laid off, people lose their homes and fall into severe debt. Now, unemployed people typically are not very happy about being unemployed and not having enough money to feed their families, pay their bills and all of that. So in order to accommodate for that, or in order to fill their time, I should say, they tend to get angry, they tend to protest, and they start to get mad and blame people for their problems. Now, this was true in North America, and this was true in Europe at the time period. It led to this big period of civil unrest, from which is going to turn people to the idea of maybe going to war again is not such a bad thing. Now, World War II actually ends this period of decline. Now, if you can remember back to World War I and World War I being a total war, or where the entire country and every aspect of society is involved in the war effort, that's a really good way of getting your economy going again. Now, that's not to say that countries went to war in World War II just to stimulate the economy, but they weren't as against going to war this time around because their economy was so bad and this offered some sort of economic relief. Now, the biggest cause of World War II was the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was the agreement that ended World War I officially. Now, the reason the Treaty of Versailles is such a major cause of World War II is that it upsets the German people to such an extent that they're basically full of hatred for everybody else in the world. When you're that full of hatred, you're going to start doing things that are going to damage other groups, and you're going to care a little bit less about it because you have that deep-seated hatred. So some of the areas of the Treaty of Versailles that were the most upsetting to the German people were things like the War Guilt Clause. Now, if you remember back, the War Guilt Clause made Germany take full responsibility for causing World War I. Now, we know that's not true. All right, if you go back to World War I lessons from when we were still in classes, Germany doesn't declare war in World War I until after Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Right? So Germany is not the one that fires the first shot. They're not the ones responsible for assassinating Franz Ferdinand. They're the ones that just happen to be the biggest military power on the side that lost the war. And because of that, they get blamed for the war. Now, the German people were humiliated by this. There's nothing more embarrassing than losing a conflict and being basically told you're a failure and that you're responsible for all of it. Right? If any of you have ever been on a sports team or anything like that and your team's lost, when everybody starts blaming you for that loss, even if it's not your fault, that's still something that can really, really upset people. Now, when Adolf Hitler comes around, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about him in this video, he uses that deep-seated hatred and that kind of humiliation to his advantage. And he offers the German people an opportunity to essentially gain some of their pride and some of their self-respect back. Now, because he offers that to the German people, he's able to get a lot of support from Germany, and that helps his rise to power. Now, the other part that was really upsetting for the German people was the damage payments. Now, if you remember back to the end of World War I, when we talked about the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had to pay massive amounts of war reparations. Reparation payments are what you have to pay as damages for causing some sort of conflict or trauma. Now, Germany in 1919 was told that they needed to pay $33 billion to the Allied countries that won the war to help them rebuild their societies and economies. Now, that in today's money is north of $2.3 trillion, right? No country in the world has $2.3 trillion lying around. Germany did not have $33 billion lying around to pay back everybody. So what this made happen was that Germany had essentially interest and loan payments to every country that they were responsible for paying, and the interest rates and the payment amounts were so high that the German economy was basically going to be handicapped for hundreds of years going forward at the current payment plan that they had. Now, there was no realistic chance that Germany was ever going to pay this debt fully off, which was kind of the intention, right? If we can take 20% of the German economy away from them every year, they'll never be operating back at full steam. There'll never be another military threat going forward. Now, Germany also lost a lot of territory. Now, one of the areas that they lost territories in Europe was the colonies of Alsace and Lorraine. Now, if you remember back to World War I, we talked about the Franco-Prussian War and how the Prussians, who are now the Germans, took Alsace and Lorraine away from the French. Now, Alsace and Lorraine are two territories that are now in France that have a very mixed Germanic-French population. As such, both Germany and the French actually wanted to control that region to bring their people into their state. Now, Germany didn't only lose territories there. They lost territories in what's now the Czech Republic. They lost territories in which are now Poland. And when those territories were taken away from the Germans, it put German-speaking citizens outside of the German country. Now, when we talk about Adolf Hitler, one of his big goals is to bring all Germanic people back into one single Germanic state. Sorry about that, my phone was ringing. Germany's goals under Adolf Hitler is to bring back in all of the German people into one German state. That goes back to the whole purpose of the Treaty of Versailles, which was to give all ethnic minorities or all ethnic people their own countries. The Treaty of Versailles did that for some countries, but they did it at the expense of the German people. Now, Germany was also stripped of all of their colonies around the world. So their colonies in Africa were all taken and distributed amongst the winning side. Because of this, Germany had less access to resources, less access to economic opportunities, and again, it just hurt their economy. Now, military restrictions. The German country was only allowed to have an army of 100,000 people strong. Now, 100,000 people sounds like a lot, but 100,000 people in your military is not enough to be a successful military, either for offensive purposes or for defensive purposes. In comparison, other countries around the world would have multi-million people armies. So Germany's army was going to be somewhere at best maybe 10% of what the rest of their neighboring European countries had. In some cases, it might be 3 or 4 times less than what, or 30 or 40 times less than what their neighboring countries would have. This caused a lot of fear in the German people because what had happened during World War I is that Russia had converted to communism and became the USSR, and most German people were afraid of the spread of communism across the Soviet borders and into Germany, and they'd have no army to really defend themselves from that. So this map right here, anywhere that's in green up here, or probably on your copies might be a a slightly different shade of gray, but the majority country up here is what the German Empire, or sorry, the yellow up here, this area is.
Attention please, there's a math meeting in room 108. That's math teachers to room 108.
Sorry about the announcement. That's going to happen throughout these videos. But this kind of mustardy color here, you've got Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and the German colonies around the world. This is before World War I. After World War I, we go from Germany and Europe being this big purplish blob over here to this light pink blob over here. It's significantly smaller. Now, in my opinion, the biggest reason that World War II happened is because of the failure of that League of Nations. And if you remember back, we talked about the League of Nations with Mr. Regas in the interwar period. This is that international government that was founded by Woodrow Wilson, even though the United States doesn't actually let him join it. And this group was supposed to be responsible to prevent another global conflict. What they wanted to do is they wanted to open a channel for discussion, a channel for diplomatic relations, and a place to discuss possible conflicts to solve them before they became full-blown wars. Now, the problem is that this group is not very effective. This group is so afraid of World War II, or the idea of World War II, that they basically decide not to fight or stand up to anybody because they don't want to make a new conflict. The problem with that is when you have a country like Germany who's being actively aggressive towards the rest of the world, you need somebody to step in and stop that, possibly through military force. The League of Nations does not want to do that, and because of that, they let Germany, Japan, and Italy basically do whatever they want around the world, and they just kind of give in. So we have some main examples of that here. In 1931, we have the Japanese invading the territory of Manchuria. Manchuria is a really rich farming territory in eastern China, which is just across the sea from Japan. The Japanese invade there, they commit massive slaughters, they kill tons of people. In the city of Nanking, there's an event called the Rape of Nanking, which will be in the video here if you follow the hyperlink. And they do this in order to gain access to more land and more resources for the Japanese people. Now, Italy in 1935 decides to invade Ethiopia, or as it's called then, Abyssinia. Italy does this because they feel like their efforts in World War I are not rewarded properly. Remember, they switched sides to the winning side, and because of them being on the winner's side, they should have gained some territory. Italy feels like they were kind of screwed over in the Treaty of Versailles. So Benito Mussolini, who's in charge now with his fascist government, and again, we'll get to what fascism is in a couple slides here, decided to invade Ethiopia to take some territory that he thought he had earned. Now, because the League of Nations had failed in Italy and Japan's case, Adolf Hitler and the Germans decided to really test them and see what they'll be allowed to do. And Adolf Hitler basically decides to start just breaking every term of the Treaty of Versailles while the League of Nations stands by and watches. Now, the reason the League of Nations does this, is because they've adopted a policy of appeasement. And what appeasement really is, it's giving the aggressor what they want with hopes that they stop. So an example you might see in high school is you might have a bully at the school, and that bully might go up and beat up kids and steal their lunch money or whatever. In order to stop that conflict between the bully and the person that's being bullied, the League of Nations idea would be that the little kid or the one being picked on just gives their money to the bully, and that way we avoid the actual physical confrontation. So the League of Nations does that with Japan and Italy and Germany, deciding to just give them what they want instead of actually having to have a conflict or a fight for it. This policy does not work. So by the time World War II starts, Hitler had essentially remilitarized the Rhineland. Remember, the Rhineland is that major industrial region in Germany. He'd essentially started to create military equipment in that region again. That's a term in the Treaty of Versailles, so he's broken that. He's annexed Austria. He's taken his troops, he's marched into Austria, and he's basically told the Austrian people they can join the German nation by choice, or they can fight against him. And by this point, he's rebuilt his army to way, way more than 100,000. He also invades what's now called, now it's the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but at the time it was the Sudetenland, which is a province in the old country of Czechoslovakia. Again, the Sudetenland is areas in which Germanic peoples would be living, and Hitler wanted to bring them back into the German Empire. Same with Austria. Austria is Germanic language based. They speak German, they have German ancestry, so that's why Hitler decided he wanted to take Austria. Now, all of these things were directly against the Treaty of Versailles. These moves gave Germany a massive amount of resources, more people, and access to a bigger military, and the League of Nations sat back and watched all of this happen. Now, fascism. We've talked about this a little bit so far, but now we're going to get into what it actually is. So, fascism is this idea of a strong dictator, so an unelected or an undemocratic or an unresponsible leader who leads their people through the use of fear and military force. In a fascist state, the nation is above all else. You do everything to make the nation better. Now, fascism is the government style that we're going to see in what we're going to call ultra-nationalist territories. Ultranationalism means extreme nationalism. So it's nationalism to the point where not only does your nation come first, but your nation is so superior to everybody else's that gives you the right to take from other nations because they're inferior. It's almost like political racism. So fascism embraces that ultranationalist belief system. It takes it and it turns it into a government system where everything every person does needs to make the nation or the nation state better. If you're not doing something to make the nation or the nation state better, you could be deemed as an enemy of the state, you could be arrested, or as we're going to get into in Nazi Germany, you could see things like the Holocaust, executions, and genocides. So Adolf Hitler is the one that brings this whole idea into the German society. Now, Adolf Hitler was a soldier for Austria in World War I. Adolf Hitler is not born in Germany. His parents are German, he has German citizenship, but he himself is an Austrian. So he's a highly decorated soldier from World War I, and he's really upset with how easy Austria and Germany caved in the Treaty of Versailles. He finds that to be an embarrassment. So in 1919, following the end of World War I, he moves to Germany and he joins a group called the German Workers' Party. This is a political group. Now, over time, it's going to shift its name a couple times, but we know it better now as the Nazi Party. Now, this party is extremely nationalistic, right? It's ultra-nationalist. My nation is better than your nation, so I can harm your nation because you don't matter. My nation matters. And this party won political power in 1933. So Adolf Hitler is actually democratically elected to be the dictator of Germany. He wins elections, he gets support in government, and he eventually, kind of like Napoleon, is able to consolidate power and get elected to be the position of dictator, right? So once he's in power, he holds these elections, and now no one can take power away from him. He's in charge. So he was given full control over the German government on March 24th, 1933. Now in Italy, they have their own fascists emerging. It's Benito Mussolini. So Mussolini, again, fought in World War I for Italy, and he loved that military lifestyle. He really liked the camaraderie, the sense of nationalism, the sense of pride that came from everybody fighting together for a common cause. So he begins this socialist idea. Now, again, socialism and fascism don't really go hand in hand, but Mussolini adapts from a socialist to a fascist pretty quick. So he joins a political party and promotes his socialist ideas, and what he's basically focusing around is that the Treaty of Versailles screwed Italy, and because of that, he starts to think that Italy needs to start taking what it's owed. And as soon as he starts thinking that, his ideas stop becoming socialist and then become more fascist and more ultranationalist. So he actually gets removed or kicked out of the Socialist Party of Italy and forms his own fascist party. Now, Mussolini and the Italians actually coined the term fascism. Mussolini is a fascist before Hitler is. In the early years of Hitler's kind of political career, Mussolini is somebody that he looks up to. Mussolini kind of thinks Hitler's a little bit of a punk originally, and then as time progresses, Hitler becomes the leader and Mussolini kind of becomes his sidekick in a role reversal. In 1922, Mussolini creates a militia group to help him essentially win political power through fear. Now again, he does have elections, but his militia group essentially rigs the elections through killings and assaults and fear so that he's the only one that really could be elected in that election. In 1935, he invades Ethiopia, and in 1939, he forms a formal agreement with Adolf Hitler and the Germans. Now, there's also fascism going on in Japan, but that's a little bit different. We're not going to get too much into the rise of Emperor Hirohito. That's covered a little bit more in some of the videos and in the slides that you guys will have, but Emperor Hirohito in Japan aren't as significant to your curricular outcomes as Mussolini and Hitler. So unfortunately, because we're not in a classroom setting and I'm talking to you through a YouTube channel, we're just going to unfortunately have to skip that. So why did World War II happen? What were some of the motivations for World War II? And what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the three aggressor countries, the three countries that I think it's safe to say were the bad guys in World War II. So for Japan, they wanted to control the Pacific. They wanted to have control of everything that was on the Pacific Ocean. They wanted to have this massive empire of Japanese people. For the Germans, they wanted to unite all Germanic people and promote this idea of the Aryan race. Now, the Aryan race does not mean blonde hair, blue eyes. That's a misconception. The Aryan race just means white European descent, right? Germanic, Swedish, kind of Northern Europeans. not the Italians, not like the Mediterraneans. We're talking like white skin, fine features, people who can trace their ancestry back hundreds of years to Europe. He also wanted to eliminate all the minority groups that lived here, right? That's our promotion of the Aryan race. We want to get everybody that doesn't fit that Aryan identity out of Germany and all German-occupied territories to keep the lineage pure, to keep their German society as pure as possible. That's a big thing with Adolf Hitler, and a big thing when we look at genocides is that idea of racial purity. And then for Mussolini and the Italians, they wanted to restabilize or destabilize the European power rankings. They thought that Italy was too far down in the social structure or the power structure of Europe, and they wanted to go to war to basically prove that they deserved more power, more credit, more kind of just respect, I guess, in Europe. So for the wartime alliances, okay, we basically have the big three on each side. Now, as you're going to notice, not every country involved is here, okay, but these are the three big ones. So we have Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. Okay, so here we have communists fighting alongside two democratic nations. We have Franklin Roosevelt in the United States. We have Winston Churchill here from Great Britain, played by Mr. Regis. And then on the other side, the side that we deem the bad guys, we have the Axis, with Adolf Hitler in Germany, Emperor Hirohito in Japan, and Benito Mussolini in Italy. So up here in the map, the blue color is the Allies. Now, you're going to notice that Canada is not filled in. We do fight in World War II. We're a significant part of the Normandy invasion, but we're going to be considered part of the British Empire. Okay, I don't know why it's not filled in blue here. It isn't, but we are there. Over here in the red, we're going to have the Axis, right? The bad guys of World War II. You've got Germany and all German-occupied Europe and territory. Down over here, you've got Japanese-occupied territory, and then you have Italy and the Italian states down here. So before World War II gets into full blown, we have some events that happened prior to that. So the first is that Italy invades Ethiopia. We've kind of talked about this. Now, Italy had tried to invade Ethiopia earlier in the First Abyssinian War. This one's called the Second Abyssinian War, but they had failed. Ethiopia was actually a relatively developed and a relatively powerful African state, so it was really hard for them to actually take. So Italy invades Ethiopia in October of 1935, and that conflict lasts until May of 1936. So it lasts 6-7 months, but eventually the Italians do take it. Now, the Italians chose Ethiopia, or as it's called then, Abyssinia, because they had Somalia above it and they had Eritrea below it, and they just wanted to kind of connect their colonies together. Now, this was a major failure of the League of Nations because part of their agreement was to stop future conflicts, and again, they just let this happen. Now, in the League of Nations, the majority of countries, or almost everybody, did not support Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. Only Germany did. But again, nobody steps in to really do anything about it. Now, we also have the Spanish Civil War. Now, this is less important because Spain doesn't actually fight in World War II because they're so involved with their own civil war going on. But World War II is only as devastating as it is because of the technologies that were tested in the Spanish Civil War under Francisco Franco. So Spain actually breaks out in civil war when a military general, Francisco Franco, leads a fascist coup of government. So he basically fights a war against the government of Spain. He wins and puts in a fascist-style government in Spain. Now, Italy and Germany support Franco in this war, and they actually supply him with military equipment, and specifically different types of bombs. One of them is that napalm, or that incendiary bomb, the bomb that drops and burns. This is the bomb that's used to kill a lot of civilians in World War II, and the Spanish Civil War acts as a way for them to test it out. It also acts as a proxy war between Germany and the USSR. The USSR backs the government of Spain, and the Germans back fascist Franco. So yeah, in this war, we see Franco with the first time of actually targeting civilians by bombing cities with these incendiary fire bombs and killing civilians who essentially make the government fold, and it works. So when the Fascist Party wins the Civil War, they don't actually fight in World War II, but they do supply economic means to Germany and the Central Powers, or the Axis of Evil, whatever you want to call them, as well as giving them military equipment. So another event is the annexation of Austria by the Germans. So again, like we talked about on March 12, 1938, Hitler just simply walks his troops into the Austrian border and says, you can either join us willingly or you can fight back and see how that goes. Now, the majority of Austrian people want to join Hitler willingly, and so they do. The Austrian people are also embarrassed in the Treaty of Versailles, and they decide to reunite under one thing, and this is known as Anschluss. That's the agreement between Germany and Austria. Now, Austria would remain under German control until the end of World War II. Now, if you remember back to the Treaty of Versailles, this was not allowed. But again, the League of Nations just kind of sits back and watches it happen. So Germany is given the Sudetenland. Again, this is that Germanic region. It's on the video here, it's the yellow mustardy color up here of what's now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but they were one country back then called Czechoslovakia. And it's given back to Germany because Germany has, or Czechoslovakia has, Germanic people in this region. Now, Germany's not the only ones to get any territory out of this. The Czechs actually lose territory to Hungary, where Hungarians are living. And Poland actually takes a small sliver up here, this little blue circle, where there's Polish people living there as well. Now, the League of Nations meets again, and they basically are convinced by Hitler's plea to reunite all Germanic people, so they allow him to have access to this. The problem for the League of Nations later is that this mustard region here was the military strongpoint of Czechoslovakia, and Hitler now has access to those armies and to those weapons and fortresses. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about before we actually get into World War II here and the actual fighting and how everything happened is the Soviet-German non-aggressive pact. Now, Germany and the Soviet Union know eventually their ideas are going to cause a war, but neither of them want to fight each other right off the bat. So what they decide to do is they decide to sign a treaty that promises no conflict between the two of them for 10 years. So for 10 years, they'll have peace, and after the treaty ends, if they want to go to war, they can. Now, this is important for Hitler because he's learned from the mistakes of the Schlieffen Plan in World War I. He realizes that he can't fight a war on two fronts like his predecessors did in World War I. So making this agreement essentially ends the need for that conflict, and he can focus on Western Europe without having to worry about the Soviet Union coming in and attacking him from the east. So the war begins September 1st, 1939, when Germany and Adolf Hitler marched their troops into Poland. Now, 3 days before he did this, Hitler actually reneged on a treaty that he had with Poland that said he wouldn't invade them, but as you're going to find out, Hitler's not the best at keeping his word. So they march across the Polish border. Britain and France give him essentially a day to think about it, and if he doesn't pull his troops out, then Britain and France would declare war on Germany. Hitler doesn't pull his troops out of Poland, and Britain and France declare war on Germany. Now, the U.S. says it's going to remain neutral in World War II. They do not want to fight again. That was their policy in World War I. We don't want to fight till this involves us. Now, Canada, on the other hand, declares war 10 days after Great Britain in order to signify that we're not part of the British Empire anymore and that we're our own thing. Now, 1 month after Germany invades Poland, and they conquer Poland pretty quick, Hitler begins the Holocaust with the deportation and the ghettoization of Poland by moving Jewish Poles out of their homelands and into ghettos and concentration camps and eventually into death camps. So how does Germany do this? Germany is very, very fast in World War II. It's because they've perfected this military strategy called blitzkrieg warfare. And what blitzkrieg warfare means, it means lightning war. And if you watch the video here, you'll see some examples of that. You'll see some animations, some demonstrations of how that works. But this tactic is basically attack one spot really strong, penetrate through, and then swoop back and clean up the rest. It's very fast, it's very effective. It also causes a lot of chaos in enemy lines, and it essentially allows you to punch through defenses much faster than if you equally distribute all your troops along a battlefront. Now, because of this, Hitler was able to conquer all of Western Europe in 6 weeks. He sacks Poland in 26 days, Belgium in 18, the Netherlands in 5, France in 6 weeks. And these are all going on relatively at the same time. They have some overlap. But again, in 6 weeks, all of Western Europe, where everything up here in this blue color is his within 6 weeks. So the main difference between World War I and World War II is that World War I is a war of expansion. The Germans are trying to expand their territory, and the Allies are fighting to stop that expansion. World War II is a liberation. Germany has all of this, right? They have it in 6 weeks. So the rest of the war that the British and the Americans and the Russians are going to fight, the Soviets are going to fight, is trying to get in here and to basically free or liberate these lands. So when the invasion of Poland starts, Germany marches 1.5 million troops across the Polish border. That's not all their troops, but that's already 15 times more than what they were allowed to have with the Treaty of Versailles. The German Luftwaffe Air Force bombs Polish Air Force bases to not allow the Polish planes to get off the ground. They attack the Navy so the Polish Navy can't get out to sea, and they blitzkrieg on the ground. This Poland has managed to get an army of 1 million people put together, but they're under-equipped, they're under-trained. Some of them have just recently enlisted. And in a series of 20-ish days, the Germans just kind of run through them. Now, as part of the Soviet non-aggression pact, there was a secret agreement that called for the Soviets to actually invade Poland from the east, and then Germany or the Soviets would essentially split that. So while the Poles are dealing with the Germans on the west, the Russians or the Soviets sneak in from the east, and essentially they're sandwiched, they're fighting the two-front war, and they fall, and Germany and the USSR split up the Polish territory. So the Battle of Belgium, this is the first major tank battle of the war. It begins on May 10th. It only lasts 18 days. The Belgians fight admirably, like they do in World War I, but they're just overmatched. Belgium's a small country, small military. They just have the unfortunate luck of being close to France. They wouldn't be invaded as much. They wouldn't be destroyed in World War I. They wouldn't be destroyed in World War II if it hadn't been for their proximity to France. The Germans actually note how brave and how strong the Belgians are. They actually have a lot of respect for that. Belgian people would fall into that Aryan identity, so Hitler doesn't want to exterminate them or wipe them out. He just wants to conquer them and bring them under his rule. So with the Netherlands, this is a little bit different because it's not so much a ground war as it is a war of the air. So the Germans drop paratroopers, so basically soldiers with parachutes, out of planes behind the Dutch lines. And they're able to kind of get close to the city, sack cities a lot quicker than if you have to march through all the fortresses and all the barriers and all the tanks that the Dutch would have. Now, the Germans also use civilian bombings here. They flatten the city of Rotterdam to the ground in a period of about 12 hours of consistent bombing. Through the paratroopers there, through the massive loss of life of Dutch citizens, the Dutch government just surrenders to the Germans after only 5 days. Now, the invasion of France, this is the longest battle that the Germans have in the invasion of Western Europe, and it takes place over about 6 weeks. Now, Germany only suffers 163,000 casualties in this. The Allies suffered 2.2 million. Okay, that is almost 20 times less than what the Allies suffer. So Germany, again, through this blitzkrieg, is just able to penetrate and sack Paris so quickly that the Allies can't even get their troops organized to actually mount a proper defense. Now, France had built massive defenses along the border with Germany. It's called the Maginot Line. But Germany, again, decides to go through Belgium and through the Netherlands, just like the Schlieffen Plan called for, and they're able to get to Paris within 6 weeks. After this, Hitler forces the French to surrender at the exact same spot in that wagon, that train car in the Armistice Glade, that the French had made the Germans surrender at after World War I. And again, there's a video down there if you want to see the surrender, because Hitler and the Nazis take a lot of video and they keep very good records of their accomplishments. Now, for the next 4 years, Europe is basically under the control of the Nazis. Life is relatively normal if you are an Aryan citizen. If you're a Jewish person or in a different minority group, it's obviously awful. The Holocaust is going on during all of this, but we're going to talk about the Holocaust in a separate video. But as things progress, some of Hitler's allies start to get a little bit greedy, and then Hitler himself probably makes the biggest mistake of the war by essentially trying to take more than they can successfully handle at this time period. So Japan decides to attack the United States, who had remained neutral up until this stage of the war. So they decide to bomb Pearl Harbor in order to try to knock the Americans out of the Pacific Ocean. Remember, Pearl Harbor is on Hawaii. It's very close in proximity to Japan. It's too close to Japan for their liking. Italy decides to go rogue and break up from the plan that they have with Germany, and they decide to invade Greece on their own. Germany decides to invade Russia. Now, this would have worked if they would have done it at the right time of the year, but as we get to, they decide to invade Russia in the winter. And Hitler decides to declare war on the United States, which brings the United States fully into the war, which is a bad thing for the Axis. So Japan decides to bomb Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. All right, so 2 years after World War II had began. Now, when they bomb Pearl Harbor, this breaks all the normal rules of war. They don't declare war. They don't give warning for bombings. They basically fly in the middle of the night, and at the crack of dawn, they start bombing Pearl Harbor. Now, Pearl Harbor was a major U.S. military or naval base in the Pacific Ocean, so it was a strategic post that the Japanese wanted to destroy. The problem is that they don't actually do as much damage as they're hoping. They hope to completely ground or sink the American Navy. They don't really do as much damage as they're hoping, and they really just piss off the United States. Now, the United States immediately declares war on Japan, but they haven't declared war on Germany yet. The problem for the Germans is that they have a treaty with Japan that essentially says anyone that declares war on Japan, Germany will declare war on that person as well. So they're stuck going to war with the United States. And remember, the United States at this time is still kind of like the big bad in terms of military power on the world. Nobody really wants to screw with them too much, and now you've brought them into a war which you had already been winning pretty easily, and now you've made things a lot more difficult on yourself. Now, because of what we just talked about, Germany has to declare war on the United States, and now the United States is fighting the Pacific as well as they're going to be fighting in Europe. So the Americans start to send troops and planes and supplies all over to the United Kingdom, where they'll start to plan their launches for the liberation of Europe. Now, this is kind of a stupid mistake that Mussolini makes, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but he decides to do it anyways. And what he decides to do is in 1940, things are going really great for Germany and Italy in Europe. They have Western Europe. Things are going great. They're just kind of getting their bearings back together to start expanding into Russia, into the Mediterranean, and then maybe into Africa. But Mussolini kind of feels like he's not doing his part. He had been kind of lagging behind in all of the battles. He hadn't really been supplying as much as Hitler wanted. So what he decides to do is he decides to try to impress Hitler. And the way he decides to impress Hitler is he's going to invade Greece. Greece is a small country. Greece, in theory, should not be able to defend themselves from the Italian army. The problem is the Greeks are a much better trained military than the Italians. So when the Italians invade Greece, the Greeks basically stand up and they kick the crap out of them. They push back the 500,000 Italian troops really quickly, and they actually push them back into Italian land. Now, Greece has essentially pushed Italy into such a bad spot that Italy is at risk of falling to the Greeks. Hitler can't have a major ally that borders France fall into the hands of Greece, who now is essentially pulled into the ally side of the war against the Germans. So Hitler needs to send troops down to Greece to support the Italians so that they can actually conquer Greece, or at least not sack Italy. Now the problem with this isn't that it's hard for the Germans to do. The Germans come in and they wipe up the Greeks pretty quick. They save the Italians. The problem is that the German troops that are sent down to Greece and Italy were supposed to be invading Russia a few weeks later. Because they have to go down to Greece, they're not ready to attack Russia when they want to. They wanted to attack Russia in the spring, so that they'd have spring, summer, and fall to sack Russia. But this delays them by about 6 months, and they don't actually end up invading Russia until the fall, and that goes into the winter, and that's a big problem. The Russian winters are just as bad, if not worse, than our winters here in Leduc. So, Operation Barbarossa, this was the German invasion into Russia. Now again, like we've talked about, the plan here was to invade them in the spring, right? That gives you the spring and the summer and the fall to get there. No one had stood up to Hitler and the Germans for more than 6 weeks. That should have given them plenty of time to sack Russia, or the Soviet Union. But because they don't invade until the fall and the winter, the Russians have a plan. And the Russian plan of defense is to basically let Germany come as far into the Soviet Union as possible and then start to fight back. Now, the plan with this is that the Russian winter will kill the majority of German citizens, and the Russian army shouldn't have to do that much. So the Russian army basically just retreats from their border slowly, just slow enough to keep the Germans occupied and to keep the Germans kind of not catching on to their plan. And then once they get the Germans hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, the Russians or the Soviets sweep behind them and block their retreat, destroy train tracks, destroy farms and everything. Now there's no way for the Germans to get supplies to their troops in the Soviet Union. The Soviets are ready to fight a war in the winter, and they start to fight back as things get colder and colder. The Germans can't retreat, they're freezing to death, and by the time Germany actually successfully retreats from the Soviet Union, the Soviets are full on in the counterattack and pushing the Nazis all the way back across Eastern Europe. So the Nazis, obviously they lose the war, right? We know that not all of Europe now is German. And they lose the war because of two things: the American involvement and the Soviets attacking from the east. Now the Nazis are defending on two sides again, and that's not going to be successful against the vastly, you want to say there's more Soviet soldiers than Germans, so the Germans can't match up to them 1-to-1. And unlike World War I, these Soviet troops are a little bit better trained. And then you have the military juggernaut of the United States coming in from the west, and essentially they just squish Germany until it's all the way back on Berlin. As the Allies are liberating Europe, they discover the horrors of the Holocaust, but again, we'll get into that later on. Now, the liberation of Europe begins on D-Day, which is June 6, 1944. This is when the Allied troops, including Canada, land on the beaches of Normandy, which is in northern France, and they start to push the Nazis back and they liberate Europe. And again, this is happening at the same time that the Soviets are doing the same thing in the East. During this time period, the Germans realize they're going to lose the war, and what they decide to do is they decide to go into full-blown genocide. They're going to start exterminating the Jews and other minority groups in Europe at a rate of about 10 to 20,000 a day across the Nazi Empire. This is called the final solution. Okay, during the final solution stage of the Holocaust, you see the majority of the 6 to 10 million executions of the Jews from the Holocaust. Now, Germany surrenders about a year before the Japanese do. The Japanese have the advantage of being on a very rocky island. It's really hard to take. If you've seen the movie Hacksaw Ridge, it's impossible really to invade Japan unless you're willing to suffer massive casualties. The United States is not willing to do that. Now, what the United States is willing to do is test this new piece of technology that they've been working on for months and years. Years and months is probably the better way to say that. This is the atomic bomb. So the United States has got approval from the League of Nations to test the atomic bomb, and they've tested it successfully in the Bikini Atoll in the South Pacific. Now, they know how deadly this bomb is in the short term. They don't really know too much about the radioactive long-term consequences of the bomb. But they take the bomb and they basically tell Japan that if you don't surrender unconditionally, so with no negotiations, we're going to drop a nuclear bomb on one of your most populated cities, Hiroshima. Japan says no, and the Americans drop a bomb on Hiroshima. This bomb kills tens of thousands. The very next day, they give the Japanese another option to surrender. The Japanese say no, and a week later, they drop another bomb on the city of Nagasaki, and they kill tens of thousands more. Because of these bombs, it's estimated somewhere around 150 to 250,000 Japanese people died as instant effects or long-term effects of this radiation. Some estimates go higher, but that's kind of the numbers that I'm the most comfortable using. Now, Japan surrenders immediately after the dropping of the second bomb. Unconditional surrender. The emperor and his kind of commanders all surrender. Some of them commit seppuku, which is the honorable suicide for a samurai soldier. I probably said that term wrong, but I don't speak Japanese. If you want to see the actual video of these two bombs being dropped, it is linked here at the bottom of this slide. So the war ends officially with the Paris Peace Treaties in 1947. And in this war, Italy loses all their territories in Africa. So Libya, Italian East Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. Italy will lose some borderland to France. Germany gives back all of its land that it had got during the war. And for war reparations, this is money that's owed. Now, I don't know why Germany isn't on here, but I'm going to assume it's in the same amount or similar amount-ish to the Italians. We're looking at over $300 million. That's probably something that should be on the slide, but I've forgotten. You can always look that up. But Italy owes $360 million. Finland, who basically decided to join the Nazis because they didn't want to be invaded by the Russians, they owe $300 million. Hungary owes $300 million. Romania owes $300 million. And Bulgaria owes $70 million. Now, following the end of the war, we have two major superpowers emerge. We have the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin in the East, and we have the Americans in North America representing the democratic government. So this is going to be a big global divide between democratic or capitalist or democracy and communism. Japan faces serious economic and military sanctions. The military sanctions still exist to this day. There are still American military bases in Japan. Western Europe will fall under the control of the United States. Now, the United States doesn't actually rule them, but economic influence and political influence, the United States lays claim to Western Europe. The Soviets get the East. A new map of Europe is drawn. Germany, as it's known, doesn't exist. It gets split into two places, East and West Germany. West Germany falls under the American sphere of influence. East Germany falls under the Soviet sphere of influence. Now, this conflict between the democratic Americans and the communist Soviets will lead to the Cold War 20 years later, and a new nation for the Jewish people is created in the Middle East, which we now call Israel. So here's a map of Europe post-World War II. Again, it's probably going to be kind of hard to see from the video, but you'll have access to these slides. So Japan post-World War II, the Japanese surrender immediately after this. They signed surrender in the U.S. battleship Missouri. If you've ever been to Pearl Harbor, or after the world's pandemic is over, you decide to go to Pearl Harbor, they have a museum on the battleship Missouri. You can go see where the treaty was actually signed. Japan is charged with war crimes for what they've done in Nanking. Japan agrees to American occupation, which still exists to this day. Japan agrees to harsh military restrictions, which still exists to this day. And then here's all the different sources. So thanks for listening. I know that was a long one, and we'll see you again soon.